So good to see you. I mean, quite a lot of you. That's really nice. And a beautiful place, by the way. Yeah, quite impressed. It's also my first time actually in Australia and New Zealand. So many firsts at the same time. Yeah. So today I had the opportunity to check out the Perthians, and I'm pleasantly impressed. Yeah. Had a beautiful walk in Kings Park and in High Park. And I saw the boat of my ancestors that they shipwrecked in front of your town, the Batavia. Yeah. These are not my ancestors that I'm proud of, so that's quite fine. Yeah. Yeah. We have 2 evenings together, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the interaction between two things that are important to the Buddhist traditions, studies and meditation, how they interact, because that can be sometimes quite obscure, I guess, how you translate one thing into another thing, which is quite important to me. Some of you might know, and otherwise we will talk about that tomorrow, but I also teach a specific meditation training that is geared towards learning how you can enrich your meditative practice through studies. So to find a deepening sense in your meditative life by applying the theoretical models of the Tibetan tradition in a suitable way, in a way that is suitable to your individual disposition. Yeah. So I would like to do the entire 2 evenings from a meditative perspective. And to do that right, in the Buddhist tradition, it's important to take refuge before anything else. But I think often that is where things already go wrong. And so it might be a good idea this evening to take refuge from a meditative perspective, to explore what that means. Why would you want to do that? Because often it feels like as though Buddhas need our refuge. Yeah. The paradox, of course, from a Buddhist perspective, if Buddhas would need us to do prayers, then we should leave. Because that would mean that they have a conditioned relationship with us or a conditional relationship with us. And any conditional relationship is unsafe. If I give you something because I want something in return, that means that our relationship is fragile. As long as you give that to me, then I might be giving it to you. But the moment you stop giving it to me, I might start to have second thoughts of doing my thing. And that is not, that is not a spiritual relationship that you want to engage with. That is not refuge. We have enough of these relationships out there. And that is your employer, that is half of your relationships, and so on and so forth. So if taking refuge would be a necessity from the Buddha side, if Buddhas would need all our bowls with water, that would say a really weird thing about Buddhas, by the way. I mean, if I would have needs, I would say yeah, give me a good vegan burger for that matter, rather than a bowl of water, but here we are. If you ever try to drink saffron water, a regular cup of tea I prefer. But the important point, of course, is that refuge should mean something to ourselves. It is at the beginning of our practice for a reason that should matter to us and not to the Buddha. But I think often the way we do it, it seems like it is a mandatory thing to do. Like you're in a Tibetan Buddhist temple, so you should recite Tibetan prayers. And we do that unquestioningly. But I think that is not the reason why we come to places like this. Now, why would you come to a Buddhist place to do things that you are required to do? Why would you have changed from one tradition to another? That's important. It's an important thing to explore. So take a comfortable position. Let's see if we can discover some of this meaning. We can start by observing for a moment simply what is, without judgment, without wanting it to be different. Simply noticing our environment and what body and mind are doing. Thus we can already notice how it feels to do nothing for a moment. Not to be obliged in any possible way. Simply to be at ease. And this is going to sound paradoxical, but even to be able to be at ease when the mind and the body are not. Maybe the mind is drowsy or preoccupied. Maybe there are unpleasant feelings. To notice that it is surprisingly pleasant or okay to be able to stay even with some internal turmoil. To sit with the understanding that not everything always has to be solved immediately. Sitting like this allows us to look deeply. To feel deeply, to understand deeply. About the only thing that we have direct access to. And that is our present moment of being. Everything you need and need to know to become awakened is here. One of the things that becomes immediately obvious is that we have difficulty being here. That the mind is constantly moving towards what is not here. The future and the past. And so it can be helpful to point out to the mind that the future and the past are non-existence. The future has to still come into existence, and the past has ceased to exist. So we don't have to reject thoughts with regard to the past and the future. Once we see that true nature, we can simply let them go. To discover ourselves a bit more peaceful when we do so. When we arrive finally in the present, we can notice that the mind is pretty judgmental about that present. As though it is constantly categorizing things in boxes of pleasant, unpleasant, or indifferent. What it wants to reject, what it wants to hold on to, what it doesn't care about. And while this distinction seems very personal, you may notice when you look deeply that the reality is contrary. That is, judgmentalism holds sway over the behavior of our mind. When something appears to your mind as unpleasant, unwanted, it becomes difficult not to pay attention to it. When a smell or a sound or an image, a feeling is unwanted, the mind becomes obsessed. As similarly with the things that it attaches to. To fight this behavior of the mind would be to double down on that behavior. Instead, we can decide to simply set all things free. To let all things simply as they are, coming and going. Introducing a bit more peace once again. Giving freedom means also receiving freedom. which allows in turn for the mind to drift inwards and encounter the body. A phenomena, especially in our world, so burdened with judgment, never looking or functioning just right. But when we look deeply, we observe that in every given moment it performs 1,000 functions to keep us alive. When we observe the body thus with gratitude and appreciation, it calms on its own accord. It feels seen and gradually at ease. Which allows us to set the body free as well, to let it be as it is. Introducing an even deeper calm. So that finally we become aware of the maker of our world, the mind. Incessantly feeling and discerning, preparing, manipulating, organizing, considering. So many activities, of which so many even precede our active consciousness. But without whose activities making sense of the world, navigating the world would be impossible. Which allows us to apprehend the mind itself with awe and appreciation. Setting even the mind free of our judgments, of wanting it to be different than it is. But we may discover for ourselves that when we observe the mind unconditionally, impartial, with care, when we set it free, even the mind simply calms on its own accord. Allow yourself not to fall into the trap to sort of rank or rate the amount of calm that you experience. The mind has its own life. It must find its own way in its own time. Even a bit of calm is better than no calm at all. In this calm, we can acknowledge that the behavior of our mind is often unpredictable. Which can leave us apprehensive. And opens the gateway to feeling not good enough, and so on and so forth. But in this non-judgmental space, we can discover that the mind responds to something. It has a reason for its behavior. In our judgmental attitude, we often fail to notice what that is. That the mind always pursues a need. On the basis of something it believes. But a belief that is obscure to us, because if we would have known it, we would have undoubtedly already solved it. Yet somehow we go around in circles. And so we need a friend. A friend that sees us in the same impartial, unconditional way. That can help us not to have to invent the wheel on our own, which is unlikely. But it can make us believe that he or she knows where calm is to be found. It doesn't require us to substitute one belief with another. But it can show us the way, one insight at a time. It shares with us insights not from a book, not from some theory, but from personal, direct experience. Whose words matches his or her behavior. And who as a guide did not lead others and leads others to dependency. But to emancipation. In such an awakened one, we can take refuge. In such a teaching that shares or that provides insight in our own direct experience, we can take refuge. And such a community of emancipated ones, of those who found freedom. And the freedom to unconditionally care. We can take refuge. That is the community that we can join. And hopefully with a measure of peace and refuge in our hearts, we can slowly rise for meditation. If you want to, we can also do this for a few hours. Fine. How did that go? Okay-ish? So that's it. I go home now. Yeah. Is that gentleman okay? Or the woman that left? It was okay. I thought of talking about, because how should I say this? Well, I thought to introduce myself, and by doing so in a manner that is informative for your practice. Yeah. I encountered Buddhism. Well, there's a few words that I would really, if I ever become world ruler, there's a few words that go. Buddhism is one of them. The Tibetans use an interesting word, nangpa, which refers that we don't seek refuge outside, we seek refuge inside. Instead of manipulating the world and whatever divinities we believe in the end, our own heart mind is the creator of the world. To seek refuge outside, to seek something that is outside, which is produced inside, makes no sense. And we live in a world where we have sort of, yeah, we've gone to extreme lengths to manipulate the outside world, to such an extent that if we continue like this, we will have emptied the world of resources. Yeah. And we are still not satisfied. You have to look on Twitter and read some of the messages of our trillionaires to know that this should not be a path to pursue. Because if that would work, they should be the happiest people ever. Yeah. And still, we all try together. Now, I encountered the Dharma, which I think is a beautiful word. Yeah. And because the other word that I would really chuck is religion. For me, the word Dharma, I mean, it's a difficult word to translate, but one view that I have on the word is a perspective on life of which we hold that it is beneficial for those that see it. It's not something that you're required to believe, that is imposed on you, but that when you see it, improves your lived experience and that of all other living creatures. And maybe these were a number of things that I was surprised by. When I encountered the Dharma, I actually knew almost nothing of it. I was a young man, pretty upset. Well, we shall call it very upset. I sometimes joke, was a metal punk guy, and on my back it says "Stormtroopers of Death," and that sort of sums it up. Yeah, and that was not entirely going in a good way. And the father of a friend of mine did some meditation, transcendental meditation. And he said, "Well, maybe you want to try that." So I just took the yellow pages. I was in a foster family, and I walked to the first place that I found in the yellow pages, and there was a Buddhist temple around my corner. Well, in the next town, but almost around the corner. And I ran into this small Theravada Buddhist monk in his simple robes, just looking at me, and I'm a big guy, now. Yeah. And he just, and yeah, sort of let's call it an expressive exterior. And to encounter someone that was just happy to see me. They said, wow, nice that you're here. Spoke very little English. But that attitude of encountering someone completely in peace, and with himself, or at peace with himself and with the world, was something new to me that I had not encountered. I never had much of an Orientalist attitude. Yeah, for me, it's fine, not entirely necessary. It's okay. If it has value, then it has value to you. But it was never like, oh wow, that's so nice and fancy. Now I have a substitution for my struggles. I was never into looking for an escape. I was looking for an answer. And so these statues did not interest me very much, but what this monk has to say touched me deeply. And one of the first things that I encountered with the Dharma is that the Dharma does not put others central, it puts life central. The divinity is not outside, the divinity is between us. And I thought that was a remarkable thing to consider. That if we want to experience something holy, we don't have to look at something that we can't see. We want to see something holy, look at the person sitting next to you. Or for that matter, look at yourself. And to discover that what I was struggling with, and we all know exactly what that word means, unfortunately, and that is guilt. To discover that it was never necessary, that I could just put it down, realizing that my mind is not me. My mind is responding to something. It is trying to do its best, but somehow it doesn't work. But there's a reason why it doesn't work, and the mind doesn't know that it doesn't work. It just keeps trying. Because there is something about our world that seems convincing to our mind. And because it looks convincing, it keeps trying, hoping that one day this will work out. And I thought that was such an eye-opener to be able to put all the things that I had collected in my young 17-year-old life and just put it down and start over. That is not your fault. Of course, it's not your fault. It's not your fault of the body, not the fault of your mind. These two things just try to do their best, but their conditions are not optimal. I thought, wow, that was such a relief. And I realized that was I was seeking. I was seeking both maybe, how should I say this, a spirituality that is not transcendent, but a spirituality that is immanent. I wanted something here, because this is the only thing that I'm sure of. No, I know that I'm here, I know that you are here, and I realized that for me, I wanted always that to be enough. And to find a Dharma that permits you to do that, that gives you the tools to experience that directly, for me, it was amazing. And that opened the door to freedom. Initially small freedom, but to put already the burden of guilt down, we all know is an enormous freedom to already have. That is such a magnificent gift. And I never looked back. So wow, a guide that can do that is worth following. Yeah. And that is always important to keep in mind, of course, from the perspective of the Dharma, we've been trying, well, our body and our mind have been trying in not entirely skillful ways since beginningless times. Yeah. And even if we don't remember all these beginningless times, in my case, that when I started, there was at least 70 years of unskillful habitual patterns. So you can't expect that to pass by in a few weeks. Yeah. And I thought that was the next eye-opener, that it did not have to happen today. It was also quite okay that it would happen tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. an immense relaxation in my spirituality. As Gandhi so beautifully says it, to no longer have to push the stream, but to trust that the stream will flow by itself. That the only thing that you can do is help it to go a little bit to the left and to the right. That's all. But until obviously I took my time. I'm pretty, according to my parents, I'm a Capricorn, and they need lots of time. Yeah, they're hard-headed, and that's both an advantage and a disadvantage. Yeah. And looking back at it, I'm glad I took all my time, because I also developed a normal, healthy adult life. I had a career, I had a partner, I bought myself a house and a car and a dog. No, actually no dogs, cats. I was a cat person. Sorry. Don't tell your dogs. Yeah, yeah. That dog, at least one of the dogs likes me. So yeah, I don't want to disappoint him, and I like him as well. But anyway, and looking back at it, I'm glad I had. It's important to learn to take responsibility also in a very worldly way. Yeah. I always joked, if I ever start a monastery, I will not ordain anyone below 35, and I want to have a list of the things that I've accomplished. I want to know that they've done good studies, that they got themselves a job, that they could pursue their own individual needs, even if they're not the best ones. Yeah. Because for a monastic life, you need a strong inner guide. You need to be able to pursue that which you put your mind on. Yeah. And people always have this idea that monasticism is a form of escapism, but I can tell you it's not. It's there where all escapism ends, and you're stuck with you. Yeah, yeah. One point in my early monastic life, I used to say, monastic life is like a marriage, but then with a whole bunch of men and without the advantages of a marriage. Yeah. So you need a good inner drive to be able to survive that. Yeah. But anyway, I nevertheless pursued, at least initially, work that I thought, yeah, I wanted my work to have meaning. I thought that if I want to get up in the morning, it needs to mean something to me. I don't need to make lots of money. I never had that many needs. I mean, I still like the one thing, I like to read books. Yeah, that's why I chose this tradition. In the beginning, I asked my abbot about, because I had lots of books, and he said, well, monks should not have many things, but in our tradition, they can have many books. And I thought, that's my tradition. I hear this. Yeah. And now with the advent of digital books and iPads and so on, I am the happiest man in the world. I can drag a whole library around in my backpack. But anyway, so I started actually my working life in palliative care by accident, but I enjoyed it. Actually, because I was some of the, well, it was part of palliative care and part of care for severely handicapped people. And at that time, that was the 1980s, this was still mainly a job for women. And they had some clients that had, especially young men, that had great sexual struggles. And so they needed something else. And the moment I walked into the office for an interview, they thought, because at the time I was also quite uncompromising, so I did not wear a suit to my interview. I just wore the same thing, Stormtroopers of Death. Yeah. So Mr. Stormtrooper of Death walked into the office and said, well, if you want, I would like the job. And they said, yeah, why not? Yeah. So Mr. Stormtrooper of Death started to do palliative care and working with these patients, and I loved it. After that, I worked for the Dutch Refugee Council at the time of the Great Yugoslavia War. I organized the settlement of refugees and families and so on and so forth. Yeah. And then at one point, a great career opportunity came. And I didn't want it. I thought I was too early. I'm 29. If I take that opportunity, then I'm stuck in that position. And I don't want it, because that will take so much of my time and my energy and so on and so forth. I'm not doing that. So I decided to go and travel. And so for the next part of my life, I just alternated between traveling the world and making money. So I would come to Holland because there's good money to be made. I would work for a year, live life frugally, and then disappear for a year until my bank account was empty again, and I would come back to Holland and do something else. And so back and forth. And so I did a number of different jobs. In the end, because of the changing attitudes towards refugees in the last 20 years, I had to move jobs in the end, and I would run into professional life. I became a manager. I did some IT work in the early days of that business, and so on and so forth. Until around 2005, I was about to go and travel again, but I realized that I needed first to stand still for a moment. And by accident or by good karma, I found a monastery in southern France. Yeah, I did a year of retreat there on my own. And by that time, I'd been meditating for, well, almost 20 years. And in that retreat happened what you hope happens, but at one point you sort of don't, how to say this? Yeah, you don't expect anymore to happen. You've read in your text that these things can happen, but at one point you just settle for the fact that meditation is also just healthy and that it helps you sustain quite challenging life circumstances. But then after a year, I saw something. I saw something that I had not seen before, and that I could not unsee and did not want to unsee either. But that was so transformational that I decided that I didn't want to go back. Like I have accomplished my lay life. I have done what I needed to do. I can look back on it with satisfaction, but I've done what I needed to do. It's over. I've accomplished everything there that I needed to accomplish. But this is what I want. So I went to the office. The abbot of the monastery, this is a monastery in southern France. The abbot was in Barcelona, so I called him. I said, again, I would like to become ordained. He said, very good, in 2 weeks. That was actually so fast. You know my size now, that the robes that the monastery had, they had some second-hand robes, but none of them were my size. Yeah. So my lower robe was almost a short skirt. Yeah. My upper yellow robe was so small that I couldn't move because it would drop. Yeah. But the photo of me coming out of the temple hall after the ordination is the most beautiful photo I have of myself. It's the only one that I sometimes share. Yeah. Yeah. In that ceremony, I literally became no one. You're allowed to let go of your name. You're allowed to let go of your hair. I had long hair. Yeah. You let go of your identity markers. And I got the name Gendun, and Gendun means literally means community, but it refers to the community of enlightened ones. And I thought that was the name that I wanted to have. To be called community is fantastic. That's why I'm here. I wanted to become a part of a Western monastic community. I did not want to go to Asia and be a stranger for the rest of my life. I wanted to be part of a Western community building something. Yeah. I worked hard on the monastic building in Nalanda. They don't know it anymore because there's such an overturn of monastics that many of them in the monastery don't know who I am. But when I walk there and I look at the floor, the tiles on the ground floor, I still think, I know who put them there. Yeah, you're walking on my work. And that's a satisfactory idea. That's what I thought of. Like, there's many ways in which we take rebirth, but above all, we take rebirth in each other. And that is one of the beautiful aspects of a monastic community. Every generation builds a layer on which the next generation can stand. I enjoy the fact that they don't know. Yeah. I managed that monastery for years. I was there, the novice master for many years, and all these things they don't know. And they should not know. Yeah. But I can look at it exactly for that reason with great satisfaction. Why did I choose to ordain in a Tibetan monastery is a good question here. Especially as I'm running out of time, that's really bad. But I've been practicing, again, I'm often asked, why did you move from Theravada to Tibetan? And the answer is, I didn't. I find that a nonsense question. Yeah. When you ask me and my brother to tell a story about the past without knowing that he's my brother, you will never figure out that he's my brother. We have the same parents, and yet the way we look back on our lives is different. My brother has a different life story. And that is why we have different Buddhist traditions. The Buddha produced many sons and daughters. And they went into the world and they had their own histories and lives and cultures and environments and challenges, and developed many different answers. And I'm very happy to have practiced and still practice two different traditions. But as someone really familiar with Theravada practices, I was first of all impressed by something that you might have heard of, and that is bodhicitta, that I had in that way not heard of before. I had already worked on developing a less conditional relationship with myself. But when I first heard about the notion to become a Buddha for the welfare of all living beings, nothing had ever made as much sense to me as that simple idea. I all of a sudden realized that the easiest way to awakening was to care for others. Not in a Western form of altruism. We often think of altruism as a negating of the person, as a negating of ourselves. But when I heard the abbot of Nalanda Monastery talk about bodhicitta, I realized that from a Buddhist perspective, altruism is not a negation of oneself, is not a disregard of oneself. It is a fulfillment of oneself. It is a fulfillment of the understanding that we exist interdependently. And like with any phenomenon in the world, when you really want to know how a tree works, you also have to talk about its soil and the whole network of the forest. It's difficult to say where a tree begins and where a tree ends. It's not possible to say that. And when I first heard about bodhicitta, I thought that's exactly an expression of how I experienced myself after 20 years of meditation. I don't know anymore exactly where I begin and where I end. If I'm a tree, I would like for the forest to be healthy. And as a human being, I would like to live for the living beings, for the humans around me, to be happy. I am rooted, well, this evening I'm rooted in you. I always joke, if I would be talking like this in front of the mirror in the morning, the ambulance would be passing by, like something is going wrong with this monastic here. Yeah. Purpose and function. To be a person is relational. It happens in between us. That is the great magic. And so that the Tibetan tradition puts that piece of magic in the middle, I figured was extraordinary. It was like nothing I ever heard before. It was a culmination of what I'd done so far. What I also found helpful after 20 years of meditation is his theory, and that we will discover more about tomorrow, I guess. On the one hand, we first need to learn to look. But that's when you want to become a painter, you have to look as well. A good friend of mine passed away a year ago now, and he was quite a famous painter in Monaco. And he always said that when he started his career as an artist, he realized that he didn't look, ever. We fail to see the world. I have paraphrased the story so often that undoubtedly it became disconnected from his story, but it doesn't matter. In my mind, he told me the story that at one point he tried to paint a tree to realize that he couldn't, that what he had painted did not look like anything like a tree. Because in our mind, trees are like something brown with something green on top. But when you paint something that is brown with something green on top, it looks nothing like a tree. You have to look again to find there's 1,000 colors in a tree. And there's dimensions and structure and so on and so forth. But we often overlook that. We look tree and then we look away. As we did this afternoon when we walked in Kings Park. And Michael was very enthusiastically pointing out all these weird Australian unique bushes. Yeah. So it's my first time here, and my mother was into flying doctors. Yeah, and my mother-in-law was into neighbors. So now you know where my knowledge of Australia comes from. It's, I guess, pretty biased. Yeah. So the bush is something in the flying doctors. Yeah. Yeah. So now I've seen the bush in great detail due to Michael. But when you walk around with Michael, it's clear that he has observed well. So he knows all these details and what these bushes are and how different birds interrelate with them and so on and so forth. So in the beginning, when we practice meditation, we really need to learn to look. And I think one of the problems that we all face when we practice meditation is that we very quickly start to manipulate. Because especially as Westerners, we often don't want to be who we are in this moment. If I would be telling you that there's a shop next door in which where you can buy another self, I would not be surprised if 2/3 in this room would immediately get up like, oh, chuck your Buddhism, I will go next door and buy myself a different person. Yeah. But that's a terrible way to relate with oneself. Yeah. And I can tell you, even if that would be possible, you would still be stuck with the same problem, because basically we're all stuck with the same problem. It's just, this is like a sauce on top of it, but the sauce doesn't really matter. Yeah. So we first need to learn to look deeply and extensively. But only to look is not enough. When you want to become a painter, you also need to learn how to use brushes. There's many different brushes. There's many different paints. There's oil paint, water paint, and so on and so forth. You need to learn techniques. There's different ways to put the paint on a canvas. There's different canvases, and so on. So at one point, you need something to be empowered by. I always joke to my own students, it is, as far as I know, true that the wheel was invented once in world history. Probably some Mediterranean people came up with the idea that you could have something around and use it to go from A to B. And in my childhood, I was into Egyptology, and I know that these people, the Egyptians called them the Hyksos, imported the wheel into Egypt, and then it took them another 1,500 years to realize that you could move big stones by them. And so if inventing a wheel, which seems so straightforward, is so rare to be discovered, and then people need another 1,000 years to figure out what you can do with a wheel, it makes it obvious that just by, if something that straightforward is that challenging to do if you don't know, it becomes also obvious that when we would just keep looking, it would be almost impossible to discover an awakening on our own. And why would you want to do that? Why would you want to invent a wheel when you can just buy a car around the corner? There's no purpose to that. And so when I arrived and became a monastic in another monastery, I first discovered the Lamrim of the great Tsongkhapa, and I found it to be an exquisite manual. But also the teachings on Buddhist psychology and on Buddhist ontology. After having looked deeply, these were so rewarding in my own meditational practice. And so from the beginning, I liked to study, I liked the scholastic studies, but only as an engagement, as something that I do together with my practice. I don't like theory that I can't apply. I love to read philosophy, but not if I can't do anything with it. If it becomes, if it moves out of my world of experience, I become immediately much less interested. Yeah? I need to find purpose. Yeah. That makes sense so far? Yeah. So to round my own story off quickly and then to say something about the meditation that we started with, I studied for 10 years in another monastery. And then I thought, I have enough. We moved into an area that I thought, this is too abstract. when I enter the grounds and paths of the Bodhisattva, I will come back and study that after that. Yeah. But I know now everything that I need to meditate. So I went into retreat for 3 years, part in France, but I also wanted to go back to the Theravada tradition, and I spent 1 year as a forest monastic in the jungle of Myanmar. Yeah, that place, to my great sadness, I can't go back to. Yeah, my monastery is closed off to me. Yeah. And so I practice still both traditions, and I teach a meditation program that we'll talk about tomorrow that mixes both traditions. The first year is actually on Theravada practices, and then adds the great variety, the great rewarding richness of the Tibetan tradition on top of that as two complementary perspectives. But having said all of that, to go a little bit back to our first meditation, the first thing that I wanted to show you is that, and that is the great insight of the Buddha that is quite unique, is that the Buddha shows us something about how we exist. And one of the mistakes, one of the wrong beliefs that our mind pursues is that there's somehow an independent, unchanging self. And we have this sense in the middle of our experience which seems so real and yet no one has ever seen. And you realize that no one has ever seen it because if someone had ever seen it, we would not have such an enormous variety of weird theories around it. We don't have weird mystical theories about the cup because we've all seen it. There's nothing mystical to be had here. It's a cup. You can drink from it, period. But when we talk about the person, then all of a sudden we have a zillion theories, all kinds of souls and atmans and whatever you have, which should be indicative of the fact that no one has ever seen it, because otherwise we would have demystified it a long time ago. Like, I've seen the self, this is what it is like. Yeah. The great insight of the Buddha is that although we have a person, we have a self, it's not an independent phenomenon. It cannot be seen in and of itself at all. It is something that arises in dependence on other things. And we will see tomorrow that this is a global insight, not only of the Buddha, but this tradition. All things exist, but only exist relationally. But if we don't find the tools to look a little bit deeper, and we keep meditating with the sense that we should enforce something, and that you encounter, when you look on Instagram too much, there's always people telling you what you should do. There's always instructions like, follow this. One wellness coach after another wellness coach, like, if you do this, if you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, or if you only drink apple juice or whatever. I mean, come on. Anything that you could possibly think of that might be better for someone. Yeah. We're always enforcing something. It's always about wanting to be different. But it's like wanting to fashion a piece of clay into a pot, but then rejecting the clay. It's like, I want to make a pot, but not with clay. But that doesn't make any sense. So when you go to meditate while not accepting, like, I don't like my body, I don't like my mind, I don't want it, I want meditation to provide me with a different one. It makes no sense in every direction. For one thing, that's not the way we exist. Now, if you throw away the clay, you will never get a cup or a vase or a pot. Now, pots exist, but pots do exist in dependence on clay. That's the way pots exist. Pots have no self-existence. They have a relational existence. That's why when you sit down and you want to enforce something on your body and your mind, the only thing that you get is a mess. Yeah. And because your body and mind react as people do. Now, when I would walk in here and start telling you what to do, on pain of punishment, then you would leave. And that is what most people experience on the meditation cushion, because they want to enforce something on the body and the mind, and then the body and the mind think like, good luck to you. we are going to do something else. Yeah. The body goes to the fridge and the mind goes to Netflix. Yeah. And they meet somewhere in between on the couch. Yeah. 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 And that's why on a regular basis, I receive emails like, Gendun, I can't meditate, I don't like it. Yeah, I know. That's not the problem of meditation. That's the problem of what we do throughout our lives. That is why we are always on the run. If you want to know why the mind is always fantasizing, it's because most of the time it tries to get away from you. Look at how judgmental we are. Would you want to be treated like that? Of course not. What do our minds fear the most? Our minds fear above all our own judgments. That's why we can't be with ourselves. That's why actually monastics have to live the first five years of their monastic lives amongst others, because living on your own in a cave or in a hut, the great ideal, is horror if you have not trained well. It is living in a community that gives you the tools to finally live on your own as part of a community. It softens your judgments. Now, when you're stuck in a building with 25 men, you have to drop your judgments because otherwise you live, well, this is worse than hell. Yeah. But you run into the fact that, in fact, what you judge is always you. No, we are mirrors to each other. We keep seeing ourselves. And so that you are free to let go of. It's not necessary. It's not helpful. The only thing that it gives to you is a very, very upset mind and a very stressed body. This is so prevalent, and it's not only Westerners that have this problem. It must have played a major role in China, because the Chinese language actually invented the whole word for this initial part of the practice. And I hope there's no one knows Chinese speakers here, because my pronunciation is undoubtedly, oh, that starts to feel like an exam. Habit is a term called Wu Wei, the doing of not doing anything at all. Learning to simply not do, but to look. And that's an essential ingredient in Buddhist practice. And the great transformational point in Buddhist practice is for a very good reason called the path of seeing and not the path of doing. There's something to be seen, not something to be done. If you're always doing, if you're always forcing, you're not looking. So the great trick is to learn to look and to enjoy the looking. And the enjoyment of the looking is to be able to learn to look in a non-judgmental way, because it feels good to be not judged. You all know when you have a good friend, why is it so nice to be with a good friend? Because you have someone in your life that doesn't judge you, that you can go to and say, well, I was silly today. And she says, join the club, I have tea. Yeah, I don't mind that you were silly today. And when you're angry with that person says, that's okay. We all are angry from time to time. There's conditions for this. It's okay. Here's a cup of coffee. But we ultimately want to be that person for ourselves. And so one of the things that I learned finally in my long-term retreats was to learn to sit with myself. I actually did that before I became ordained. I was quite burned out. And I figured out that I was burned out because I was making myself do some things. And that is what we all do. So relentlessly pursuing something in disregard of my body and my mind, until my body and my mind told me, we are stopping now. This is where this ends. We are no longer collaborating with you. Yeah. Yeah. My body and mind had different terminology for this, but you can imagine what that must have sounded like. And so when I first came to the London monastery, I had a nice hut, and when I sat down, I realized how much resistance there was inside still. Even after 20 years of practice, old habits die hard. Yeah. And so for a year, I did one simple thing, not walk away. I decided I will just sit for as long as it takes. Yeah. In the morning, I did some physical work because that is healthy when you have a burnout, it's good to make the body exert itself so that it can relax well afterwards. So I worked in the mornings of that building. That's where the famous tiles were deposited. And then I just sat down and did nothing. I just sat and just looked. Like, I will not walk away from you anymore. I will hold you for as long as it takes. I really upset you. And if you need 10 years to calm down, I will sit with you for the next 10 years until you calm down. And that turned out to be the whole trick. To look at yourself without judgment, with an impartial and unconditional attitude. To say, not to see the body and the mind behaving in a certain way and to know there's a reason why they're doing so. And that's okay. And the surprising thing is when you do that, everything comes quite on its own accord because everything within you feels safe. That is what we mean when we take refuge. Refuge is finding a place of safety where you can relax and breathe. Not breathe with this thing in the middle. Breathe with the thing here, down below. And I still always do that. I sit down on my cushion and I don't immediately start with prayers and whatever you have. I just enjoy not doing anything at all. I enjoy being, we have a nice word for this, my favorite term, equanimity, but we'll get back there. Yeah. Equanimity doesn't sound very sexy, but it's one of the best things in our canon. There's two things that matter at the beginning. There's an unconditional care and equanimity. This is necessary at the beginning, in the middle, which will come to fruition in the end. Yeah. So just to sit there, to say, I hold this. I like French for that. You can sell anything in French. But je t'embrasse. I mean, come on. Actually, you should memorize that phrase because then you can tell yourself when you sit on your cushion, je t'embrasse. Yeah. It really means, I always think, I have the grace of a big body and I have enormous arms. I always think, like, what is the reason I have such long arms? Because I can hold anything. And just to sit like I hold it. Whatever's here, I hold it. And to simply sit like that does something quite exquisite. Because that is the first thing to see. That when you see yourself with an unconditional attitude, everything comes on its own accord. You just have to wait. It is the seeing that frees. One of the great Theravada masters I trained with, Pa-Auk Toya, or Pa-Auk Sayadaw, it actually has even as a title of a book, The Seeing That Frees. But it's about the seeing. How do you look? How do you look? And if you look with equanimity, that which is seen by your equanimity calms. Now it no longer has to run away from you. So it can be with you. And then all these activities, all these superfluous activities, all this constant friction and striving and fighting and holding on become unnecessary in time. Not because you calm them, but because they stop, because they are not necessary. So that's a wonderful way always to start one's practice. Simply to sit and to enjoy the sitting. And maybe that's all that happens, but it's enough. Now, if that is what your session, if that is everything in your session, that is already worth your while. Everything is extra. When you can sit like that, then you can start to look, what is the mind pursuing? Why is doing what it does? Our mind is the maker of our world. It's not an outside creator God. It's our mind that makes our world. So why is it doing what it is doing? And then we realize that our mind needs help. There's something in our perception that escapes us. There's something in our perception that is not entirely right, that our mind keeps going after. Yeah. And so at one point it will be worth our while to ask someone, could you point that out. The famous pointing out instructions for those familiar with Tibetan Buddhism. Yeah. To go a little bit over time. You can be grateful that I'm not called Lama Zopa Rinpoche, because then we would be talking until 5 o'clock in the morning, but I'm not doing that. Yeah. But when you look at the Buddha's biography, you see the same. It's actually the ascetic practices that he cultivates in the beginning are harrowing. You have no idea what this man did. And I can advise you only one thing: don't try this at home. Yeah. And then he, in a way, figures out exactly the same thing. He figures out that it doesn't go anywhere. Actually, there's a woman that helps him. Yeah. We all need help along the way. And that points out that this is not going anywhere. This is only going in one direction: death. He's killing himself. And then he remembers he remembers an episode when he is really young. His father was like well, we call that a king, but it's a little republic. And Republican, well, yeah, that's something that you Australians still have to figure out. We talked about this afternoon. Republicans don't have kings. So just saying. Yeah. Yeah. But his father is like what you call the first amongst equals, probably like a council of elders that were leading that tribal community. And at the beginning of spring, he performed like what do you call this? A fertility ritual by plowing the first, whatever you call that in the field. The furrow, thank you. And to do so, his parents brought a child with him, and they put him under a rose tree, what it's called. And he remembers that sitting there while his father was plowing, that he descended very naturally in what is called the first concentration. And that it was joyful. It's a simple practice of letting go, of calming, what children can easily do because they're not burdened by the complexity of the life narratives that we start to tell at one point. And he realized this is the starting point. Just easing into a deep calm. And so then he gives up on all these ascetic practices and simply eases into it. But in that ease, he also discovers an urgency. Not an urgency as something that has to be imposed, but a human urgency. I have a problem. And he says that is one of the great steps of spiritual adulthood, to be able to say, I hurt. Because especially in our world where we overemphasize this individual responsibility for our lives, it's impossible to say that you hurt, because if you hurt, it's your fault. And it takes quite a step to say, I hurt, not my fault. And it's quite okay that I hurt. And he sat down there and he realized, well, everyone hurts. And this is urgent. I will not get up until I have an answer about why everyone hurts and if there's something to be done about it. And this is famous last night, in which he first realized something about his own initial existence. What is going wrong in his own continuum. Then realizing it with regard to all living beings. And then finally, in the third wake of the night, shedding his ignorance and thereby stopping hurt forever. And so that is the path to follow. First, to find a deep, unconditional ease with oneself. Yeah. And then to answer for yourself why it is urgent for you to practice. Not because I tell you, or because a book tells you, or because Tsongkhapa tells you. Because then you're still imposing on yourself. These books are guides, not what you should do. There's no should here. Should is always an imposition, and when you impose on the mind, you're either escaping or your mind will try to run away from you at one point or another. Yeah. And that's why often studies can become so divorced from actual practice, and it is a waste of our time. Yeah. Like the Lam Rim of Tsongkhapa, the greatest stage of the path, provide you with reflections on your own lived experience. That is what he wants to say. Like, I look deeply and That's what I saw. And this is the way the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha gradually guided me out of my own internal struggles. So that's the second thing I wanted to show you in your meditation when you were calm, to look at your own urgency. Because that is where your motivation comes from. It is how we judge it. But when you judge it, you can't use it as a vehicle. Only when you know what your mind is trying to pursue, that it expresses to you that it has major challenges. Only then can you start to have a discourse with it, a dialogue with it, like what is it then that you need? And then, only then can you start to look at the Dharma and say, what does the Dharma have to offer to respond to those needs? And then you realize that what we need, for one thing, as we are relational beings, we need good relationships. We need good relationships with ourselves, and we need good relationships with others. And it was, well, I have a bunch of practices for this. Equanimity, appreciative joy, loving kindness, care. These are very good practices to restore your relationship with you and your relationship with those around you. And then you have good tools to navigate the world. It makes the world softer, more rewarding, more rich. Yeah. And then on that basis, when you have good soil to start to cultivate, you can start to ask, like, so obviously there's something else going wrong. I don't know who I am. And looking at my own behavior, I also have no clue who you are. And because if I really would know how I am, then I would be able to conduct myself. But we all try to do, and we all know sometimes we can feel so frustrated by that we would like to take life in one direction, and then, well, the rest sort of happens. How we plan, but life happens. And you think like, well, if I would really know who I am, why is this still happening to me? Why am I a bad guy to myself? And why are so many of my relationships so difficult? Maybe I don't know who the other people are. Maybe I'm responding to them in ways that are not skillful, that do not bring me what I seek. And that gradually opens the door to a more fundamental exploration, both on the cushion and off the cushion, both meditatively and while studying. And then the three great trainings of listening or studying, contemplation, and meditation start to interact with each other. Your meditation becomes your experimental lab, as it were. Yeah. You on your cushion, you make your circumstances simple, because in daily life the complexity is way too great in the beginning to undo it. You don't know where to start to look. So on your cushion, you can make life a little bit more simple. Then you study to get constantly new feedback. You talk to someone, you get something in return. And you use your contemplation to see, like, so I got these instructions, I got this information. How does that matter to me? How does it relate to my own life? What do I hear when I look at these notions, when I look at selflessness and impermanence and conditioned existence and karma and rebirth? How does this relate to my lived experience? And that deep internalized understanding you can then bring again to deepen your meditation. And so in that sense, you get a feedback loop in which your meditative life grows quite by itself. Yeah. Does it make sense? Yeah. Does it leave any questions? If you want to, we can have a few if that's okay. Yeah. No questions is also okay. Yeah.
Interested in what you say about how you connected yourself when you first went to the monastery, in that you worked and then you just sat, did nothing. I'm interested from two aspects. One is, where did that come from? Just an inner sense that that's what you needed to do. And secondly, something, I guess, about your experience of that letting go. If you could just say a little bit more about that.
I can say more about it. I'm not sure if I can say a little bit more about that. I'm not known for the little part. In that sense, I fit quite well in this tradition. There's no Tibetan teacher that will say a little bit about something. But I can say something about it. Well, to say it in a broad way, I think, from a practitioner's way, I think it's good to learn one tradition really well. Traditions are context. Any language, for example, belongs to a certain context, the Dapsu context. That is why Australian expressions make no sense to me. Yeah, I once traveled for a while with Australians, and then I thought I spoke English, but here now we had disagreements when they came to expressions. But of course, you develop expressions for your own environment. Of course, I don't understand them because I'm not part of your environment. Yeah. And so it's good to learn to study deeply a specific specific tradition, I would say. And then you can branch out. I think branching out is equally important, because I think all the great traditions heard things from the Buddha that the Buddha said, and that they specialized in, or that they emphasized. So the Theravada tradition has magnificent tools. That is, I would not be the monastic that I am today without that tradition. But in that retreat, I actually opened a little booklet that some of you might know by Shunryu Suzuki, Zen Mind, the Beginner's Mind. Pretty simple book. And I think possibly in the first lecture is just a bunch of 25 lectures or something. And he expresses exactly this Chinese idea of Wu Wei. And that was the right moment to read it. And I thought that is exactly what I need. I need to not do anything at all, because I'm still, after all this time, I'm still imposing. And my mind is tired. And I need to work with that tiredness. So I thought I need to learn not to impose. So that's one thing. There's a deeper answer to this. In the end, I did 3 years of retreat. And when you really learn to be still and to look, you lose your self-story. You don't realize, I always say that our sense of self is the most expensive thing that we have. If we would have spent as much time working as talking about me, we would have all been rich. And so this endless story that is quite a violation, actually, of who we are, because we can't live up to that story, both in a negative and a positive way. It's unrealistic. And we carry this enormous thing around. And it was such a blessing to not think about me for 3 years. And I could not have done that without my studies as well. So I had 20 years of meditation in my belt, and well, by that time, almost 30 years, and 10 years of studies. And that combination allowed for profound trust, because that is another thing that we will talk about tomorrow that you need. Studying the Dharma gives you trust in why it works, because otherwise you end up just doing something because you believe. And I'm not the believe type. I like to know type. I want to meditate with trust. I don't need it to have a certain pace. I don't mind to sit as long as I need to. I didn't need to achieve calm abiding in 2 weeks. I didn't care if that was 2 weeks or 20 years. I wanted to know that it worked and why it was necessary, why I needed it. And so with that trust, I could let go of the I am story. And that was one of the greatest reliefs of my life. I still don't do that. It's the most, I remember coming out of the retreat, and I made a few phone calls because I had some needs, and then my idea was to initially to teach in a meditation center. But anyway, I made some phone calls, and my own teacher thought it was a better idea that I became a resident teacher in the middle of the city, which was actually a very good idea, but I didn't know at the time. But anyway, so I ended up being the resident teacher in Amsterdam. So I contacted the center in Amsterdam, and the first thing, of course, they asked, like, can you write us a biography to put on the website? And I almost vomited, because that was the first time in 3 years that I needed to tell an I am story, and my mind didn't want to. I thought, I will never do that again. Yeah. I find myself a way around it. Now I know it's a lie, but it's a necessary lie. Because we are always becoming. There's nothing that you can say that has, in that sense, an eternal value. Because you have to see, well, like, I'm a teacher of, I am not, when I'm shaving in the morning, I'm not a teacher. That is ridiculous to say. When I'm shaving in the morning, I'm a shaver. Because I'm solving a need of having a beard in the cause, well, with the monastic rules that don't allow me to have a beard. So then I'm a shaver. And then I'm a breakfaster. And I'm a petter of dogs. And you can't say I am, because we trap ourselves in that. And so in a life without a narrative, I encounter myself as much as I encounter you. This moment of me I have never met before. So I meet you, but in meeting you, I also meet me, because I am only something in relationship to you. And then later on, there's something else. So every moment is a discovery, but also every moment is something that you can also simply let go, because there's nothing else to do than to let it go. All things come and all things go. So I'm at ease, but because I'm at ease, I also have the fullness of the present. And it is only in that fullness of the present that you can practice. Make sense?
Totally. Well, absolutely.
Is there's a few tools that you can use. So the first tool that I highlighted, we will come back to that tomorrow, is equanimity. Never wanting anything to be different than it is. Yeah. My favorite expression comes from a terrible movie, Lawrence of Arabia, but Richard O'Toole. And he plays a British officer that, of course, is about to do terrible things in the Middle East, manipulate the hell out of everyone, and then cheating them after all. But anyway, that's all about British activities, I guess. Yeah. But there's one scene in which he is a young officer in a maps room. They're planning the war, and this room with all these maps and so on and so forth. A few other officers come in, and then he shows them a trick. And the trick is to light a match and to extinguish the match with his fingers. It's pretty silly, but anyway, 1950s, they didn't know. And so one of his fellow officers tries the same thing. So he says, light a match, and he extinguishes. And that, of course, hurts. And he says, well, how do you do that? Because it hurts. And then he says something important. He says the trick is not to mind that it hurts. If there's hurt is there because there is conditions for hurt. Not to want it is to double down on the hurt. If I hurt and I don't want it, I hurt twice. But if I hurt and I don't mind the fact that I hurt because it is the only thing that is here, it halves. Because at that moment, there's an unconditional attitude of myself towards that which is part of myself. And that I do always. I don't mind. I'm still a human being. I'm not awakened yet. But the one thing that I can really do is to be accepting of everything that is within. That's equanimity. Yeah. That is, yes.
I happen to like the word equanimity. So
Okay, great.
I was just wondering if you got a better word in your learnings and.
No, I like it a lot. And I like it a lot, especially because of its definition. And see, here is where study comes in. To make the definition a bit short so that it is comprehensible, it is the freedom of aversion, desire, and ignorance in which the mind becomes natural and spontaneous. When you let everything go, because we believe that our preferences are choices, but they're not. That's make-believe. We have conditioned preferences, and on that we base identities. I'm the person that likes blah, 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 blah. We perceive these things as freedoms, and they're not, they're prisons. Because if they were freedoms, you could let them go when you're sitting on your cushion, but you can't. They're the controls of your mind. And our minds are anything but spontaneous and natural. And so the trick is to learn not to mind them, not to mind anything at all. It's not an invitation to passivity, because in that space you can figure out what is skillful and what is unskillful. And above all, to figure out that the desire and aversion are both unskillful. And so they're not necessary. There are no guides to anything at all. And so then you get a nice circle. So I sit down and I don't want the present to be different than it is. So if the neighbor wants to shout to her dog, that's fine. She's not my property. She has her own needs. She does not have to live up to my needs, that I'm a meditator and they should be silent around. Makes no sense. But the moment I set her free, my mind is free of the sound. It can, but does not have to pay attention. But the moment I'm annoyed by it, I can't stop listening. Or if you had been a beautiful singer and had become attached to it, it would also become impossible to ignore her. But the moment I don't mind, and not minding in a negative way, it's not ignoring it, because ignoring it is an aversion. That's like not trying not to think about pink elephants. The only thing to do that is by reciting pink elephant, pink elephant, pink elephant in your head. The thing is not to mind it, because she's not your property. It is simply what is. And then maybe you think like, oh, she's a good singer. That's relaxing. I will listen to her for a while. And then at one point you think like, that's okay. I don't need to listen anymore. And then you can just move your attention wherever you want, because your attention is free. Only in the absence of aversion and desire is your intent free. You can move it skillfully in the way that suits your needs. Then you are spontaneous. And that's the outcome of Wu Wei. And the Buddha is described as effortless. It just happens. And that's what we all want. I always joke and it's not actually a joke. That's the final thing I will say, since I'm well over time. But when I was newly ordained, I was the only person in my monastery that could speak French. So you're ordained for a few weeks, and then someone comes to you and says, Gendun, can you teach in Toulouse? I was like, no. Gendun, can you teach in Toulouse? Well, at one point, you end up saying yes. And so I went up going to Toulouse. And what do you do when you're newly ordained and you're sitting in front of a group of people? Well, your French is not very good. Is that you're embarrassed. Yeah. And so you're judgmental. And you're self-aware. And what is the worst way of giving a Dharma talk? Is by being self-aware. That's why we all fear speaking publicly. Because the moment you think about you, you start to wonder what other people think about you. And then you know one thing for sure, no, you're no longer thinking about what you wanted to say. You're doing two things at the same time. What you want is that something effortless happens. I talk here not because I've prepared this or that I want to live up to your expectations. I've conditioned my mind well. So I give it a good motivation why I want to be here, what I want to be with you. I've given it good information. I find my voice in the Dharma. And so then for the rest, I don't have to do anything at all. I'm as much as a spectator as you are. And that's what we all want. We want things to happen effortless. I'm sitting here effortlessly. I don't have to do anything. I don't care. Might be the best evening, might be the worst evening, the worst talk ever. These are conditioned phenomena. Maybe I have it, my jet lag is too strong. It's not my best talk ever. And that's fine. Because if I have a jet lag, then that's human. Then my talk could not be any better than it is. So why judge it? Maybe the spider jet lag is my best talk ever. But that doesn't mean anything about for tomorrow. So I can just be here with whatever happened as you are, and be at ease. That's where we want to go, and that's what equanimity grants you. There's a surprising fullness of life in the absence of aversion and desire. That is where you find life. In fact, the aversion and desire are always friction with the present. Attachment tries to hold on to something where there's nothing to hold on to. Desire doesn't want the present. Aversion doesn't want the present either. So you're always denying what is here. But in the absence of those three, the only thing that rests is life. It's here. Then all of this is yours for the moment that it exists. No? The present is too short, almost too short, to have all of it. Only someone that is fully present, fully mindful, unconditionally caring can have all of it. Buddhas can have all of it in one go. That's where we want to go. Then we are fully alive. Yeah. Like that. That is what meditation is all about. One final sentence to take home, to meditate on this evening. The great Shariputra, one of the great disciples of the Buddha, at one point is asked, how does it feel to be enlightened? And he says, it's being without a center. We have always this thing stuck here. This is just a story. Let it go. Then the mind becomes like space. And that space you're free. Yeah. But that we'll talk about tomorrow. Yeah. Anyway, very good to meet you. Thank you for patiently listening to me and going well over time. Dutch people would say, well, this last half hour was for free. And everything for free you should consume. Yeah, like that. Yeah. And tomorrow we'll talk about a few technicalities. Yeah, to make your life, your meditative life, deeper than it is. It's not that difficult. Yeah. It's not that difficult. It's actually much easier than you think. Yeah. My pleasure. Yeah. I steal everything from the guy behind me, so. And the woman. Yeah. We should have more female representation behind me. Well, she's hanging. Well, I think she should. Yeah. A lot of men behind me. Yeah. Yeah. That's something to explore. This is a good time. That's one of the unique occasions, I think, of Buddhism in the West. We have, and that's one thing I forgot to say, one great reward that we have for the first time since the Buddha passed away, that all the sons and daughters of the Buddha are back together. You can take a bicycle, well, here not. In Amsterdam, you can take a bicycle and visit any Buddhist tradition ever invented by his progeny. And that is new. And we have a new canonical language, English. You can study Dogen, Tsongkhapa, and Buddhaghosa in one evening in exactly the same language. That is exquisite and extraordinary. Yeah. And so that's really something to rejoice in and to explore. There was something else that I wanted to say that just walked away from me. Yeah, like a cowboy and Indians running away from each other. Yeah. But anyway. Yeah. Oh yeah, no, so no, and now what I want to say is that one of the things that I really rejoice in is that in the enormous work that is being done is that the voices of women is put back in their original place. The Buddha might have been the first person that created an organization for women, organized by women themselves. In a period 2,500 years ago, that was a very risky choice to take, a risky choice that is often misunderstood by the later traditions. We have one of the few spiritual canons that has a major part that is spoken by women, the Therigatha. Yeah. And in these thousands of years, there have been a great number of exquisite female practitioners whose words we still have. And so more and more of this is being translated. So if you ever want a list of books, I'm also the former librarian of my monastery. So know what you're going to ask, because you will know what to do with next Christmas, for that matter. But a good book would be to start with is by Bhikkhu Nalayo. It's called the Daughters of the Buddha. Yeah, yeah, yeah. See, it's already bought. Here we are. And with the new AI, yeah. Siri, buy Nalayo's Daughters of the Buddha. Ding, ding. Wouldn't that be great? So let's go forth and multiply our virtues like that. Yeah. Oh, we can dedicate. Yeah. Can you do it? Because I have not my glasses with me.
Yes. So it's on page 8. Page 9. Prayer for long life is held up as long as the Lama. Incomparably kind and supreme, granting wishes for you, source of every fulfillment and happiness of this world. May you have a long life and live your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Savior of the land of snow, teachings and greater beings, who extensively clarifies the mind that unifies emptiness and compassion. To the lotus hall that turns in God's will and beseech. May all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. I pray for the swift return of Hamza Boucher. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children, victorious ones, Prabhakas and Shega Buddhas, victorious Gostan, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge, humans and lands, peace, bestowed religion, goodness, converse, this prayer, here and now. Holding and spreading the Buddha's gracious and complete teachings, for explanation of practice, toward the honor of magic and merit of service, Venerable Gendun Guru, you got make requests. While striving single pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other beings who suddenly depart with peace, what a great loss. Nevertheless, to the unnecessary truth, the blessings of the creation, three jewels, and the great waves is what achieves the children of the victorious ones. May the smile of reincarnation swiftly beam in glory and fortune bestowed. Lord of Dharma, who accomplishes who in accordance with the various dispositions of those to be construed, make clear the light to be well spoken for Christ, for the sake of Gendun tradition, essence of his teaching. Almost an holy Lama, to you who are supreme, you make this prayer of supplication. Lama, please, please, smile.
Of course, the greatest of dedications is to go into the world and enact the wishes of the Buddha and of our teachers.